Welcome back. We're going into the Titans tonight. Not the stone versions, not the names carved into pedestals in museums, the actual Titans. The ones that breathed, the ones that were so vast and so luminous that the sky itself hadn't figured out yet how to be still around them. Picture the first light, not the sun, not a sunrise, a pulse, a presence so enormous you wouldn't see it with your eyes, you'd feel it the way you feel barometric pressure drop before a storm, in your sinuses, in the backs of your teeth. There were no temples then, no altars, no cities, just the void and its wind and the terrifying, vertiginous weight of being the first thing to ever point itself at the stars and say, I am. Here is what most people carry about the Titans. They carry the story where the Titans were the bad ones, the monsters, the dark that had to be swept away so civilization could set up shop. The story where their fall was a victory, progress, necessary violence for the sake of order. They're wrong. They are catastrophically wrong. Before the gods, before the thunderbolts, before Olympus had even learned to have rules, there was a light so complete it was almost unbearable, and the story of how it ended is not a victory story. I want to be honest with you about this. It is a betrayal story. It is the story of the first and deepest wound, and it never fully closed. Come with me now, down, into the architecture of things, into the place where Kronos is still waiting in the stillness, and the air has that quality. If you've ever been in a room where something huge just happened and the room hasn't caught up yet, it's that quality. You feel it behind your sternum. Not a thought, a shift. Your body carries this era, the time before names, in the cells of your blood, because the cells of your blood carry the echo of the first breath ever taken, and that breath. Anyway, before the Titans, there was nothing, and the nothing was not the soft kind, not restful. It wasn't. It's hard to describe, actually. I always stumble here. It was a nothing that strained, that ached, a void so total, so perfectly pressurized in its own emptiness that eventually the very completeness of it generated its own first answer. The Greeks called this chaos. They meant the original gap, the chasm between what wasn't yet and what needed desperately to be. From chaos, the first things came. Not born, that's not the right word. They arrived the way rock strata arrive, slowly, with a kind of geological inevitability. Gaia, the deep body of the earth. Massive, patient in a way that makes human patience look like a toddler's attention span. Tartarus, the abyss beneath everything, cold and dimensionless. Eros, and here's the part that gets me every time, the part I could spend 3 lectures just circling. Eros, who was not love the way you mean love. Not yet. Eros was the primordial force of attraction. Gravity with desire baked into it. The pull of one thing toward another that would make every subsequent union in the history of existence possible. Then Erebus, the darkness that fills space. And Nyx. Nyx was the night. She was, I'm going to be honest, I keep revising how I describe her, and none of my descriptions are fully right. She was so old and so terrible that even Zeus, later, full of his lightning and his certainty, would hesitate at her door. That's the only measurement that matters. She was the thing that made Zeus hesitate. These are the Protogenoi, the firstborn, the utterly primordial. From their slow, geological couplings, the world began to take shape. Gaia, vast and patient and deep, pulled from her own substance a companion. Auranos, the sky. She made him to cover her completely. to arch above her on all sides, to be her equal and her opposite, the infinite above answering her infinite below. And Uranos looked down at his mother and his wife, categories which had not yet, in the beginning, learned to be separate, and the sky fell in love with the earth. This was the first love story. It had the seed of its ending inside it from the first word. Uranos was vast and beautiful, and his love was of the encompassing kind. But he was afraid, primitively, absolutely afraid, in the way only the first things could be, without precedent, without philosophy to console him, without anyone who had survived this particular fear to tell him it was survivable. He had looked into the void from which he came, and the void had looked back, and what he saw there made him desperate, clutching, hungry in the way that hunger becomes indistinguishable from damage. He would hold everything he loved so tightly that the holding became the destruction. Gaia and Uranos had 12 children, 6 sons and 6 daughters, the Titans. I need to pause here because the names matter and I don't want to rush them, and I also know that if I give them the weight they deserve, I'll be here for an hour on names alone. So I'm trying to find the middle. Bear with me. The sons, Oceanus, who became the great encircling river at the edge of everything. Coeus, the axis of the sky, the pillar of the north. Creus, god of the constellations. Hyperion, the one above, the lord of light, who would become father to the sun and the moon and the dawn itself. Iapetus and Kronos, youngest son, most cunning, most desperate, the one whose name the ancient world said with a specific combination of awe and dread that I don't think we have a word for anymore. The daughters, Thea, who gave the quality of divine brightness to gold and silver, the reason precious metals gleam. Rhea, whose name meant flow, whose nature was abundance and generation, and the deep, patient love of the mother. Themis, who carried inside her body the knowledge of how things were supposed to be. Mnemosyne, memory herself, made divine, made Titan, the one whose inheritance would prove the most dangerous and most necessary. Phoebe, the bright, the prophetic, keeper of the oracle at Delphi before Apollo ever put his hands on the stones, and Tethys, who would marry her brother Oceanus, and together they would flow, endless and encircling, around the edges of the world, 12 vast luminous intelligences, 12 ancient minds filling the young world like the first notes of... No, not that. They filled the young world the way oxygen fills a space that's been sealed too long. Suddenly, completely, making the silence before them sound, in retrospect, less like absence and more like waiting. And Uranos looked at them and was terrified, not of them exactly, of what they showed him. He looked into his children's faces and saw the void looking back, saw chaos in the depths of them, saw Tartarus, saw all the things he had tried to outrun by filling himself with love, all the things still waiting at the edge of existence, like water against a dam that knows it will outlast the dam. It's not a clean image, I know, but there's something right in the ungainliness of it, in the way the water doesn't care, it just waits. So he did what the most powerful things do when they are most afraid. He used his power against what he'd made. He pushed his children back into the body of Gaia herself, refused to let them fully emerge into the world he'd built, trapped them in the dark interior of their mother's form, in the space between the Earth's surface and its core, in the cavern dark that had no name yet, because no one had needed to name something so precisely and fundamentally wrong before. Gaia felt this. Let that sit for a moment. She felt every child press back into her, felt the weight of them, the heat of them, the anguished thrashing of 12 vast intelligences, crammed into a space that was never meant for them. She felt it the way only a mother can feel it, not just her own pain, but each child's pain arriving separately. 12 distinct registers of captivity, 12 flavors of trapped. And she expressed this the way the earth expresses things. In earthquakes, in volcanic rupture, in the slow grinding of continental masses against each other, the cracking of crust under impossible pressure. She suffered for a long time, and then she fashioned something from her own grey flint, from her own deep-mined mineral self, a sickle, hard, some sources say adamantine, unbreakable, the hardest substance she could make from herself, and she brought it through the darkness of her own body to where her children were trapped, and she spoke to them. The first maternal conspiracy. The first time a parent looked at her children in the dark and said, "The one who says he loves you is destroying you." The Titans heard her and went still, considering. Kronos reached up through the dark and took the sickle from his mother's hands. The law of it is this: power that cannot allow the existence of what it has made will be answered by what it has made. Every imprisonment carries in its architecture the instructions for its own end. Uranos wrote this law himself without knowing it. The moment he pressed the first child back into the dark, he built the conditions of his own undoing, and then, in the particular way of those who have always had power, he refused to believe those conditions could ever produce a consequence. Almost nobody tells this part right. They get caught on the violence, which I understand, because the violence is enormous and vivid and shocking even now, even knowing it's coming. The weight of the sickle in Kronos' hand, the cool flint against his palm, the particular quality of stillness inside him that was not peace. Something worse than fear, actually. Determination. Determination has that quality sometimes, that terrible quietude. And yes, all of it deserves to be felt. But everyone stares at the blood and misses what the blood made. And everyone stares at the act and misses what the act meant. And by the time the story is over, they've watched the most important moment in the history of power and come away thinking they saw a monster win. The moment itself was swift. Uranos came to Gaia in the night, the way he always came, spreading himself across her, the way the sky spreads at nightfall, surrounding, encompassing, enormous and inevitable. And Kronos was waiting. He reached up with the sickle, and he did what no one had ever done. He separated the sky from the earth, cut through the divine body of his own father with a blow that split existence at one of its oldest seams. The blood fell, down into the sea, down into the earth, down into the spaces between things that don't have names. From that blood came the Erinyes, the Furies, born directly from divine pain, destined to punish those who violated the bonds of blood and loyalty, which tells you something about the ancient understanding of what vengeance actually is and where it lives. The giants came from that blood too, vast warriors who would one day rise against Zeus himself. the Milii, the ash tree nymphs who would eventually midwife the third race of mortal men into existence. And then, this is the part I find myself returning to, the part I have trouble walking past quickly. From the sea foam that gathered around the severed divine parts, there came Aphrodite, the goddess of love, born from violence and salt water and the mingling of divine blood with the eternal sea. She rose from the foam, somewhere near Cyprus, with a look of absolute composure on her face, as if she had always known she would arrive this way, as if the manner of her arrival was, to her, entirely beside the point. I don't know why that detail arrests me the way it does. I've kept it in every version of these notes, the composure, the sense of a woman completely unbothered by the catastrophic circumstances of her own birth. Maybe it's because the origin of love being located in violence and salt water feels true in some way I don't fully want to examine. Ouranos retreated upward, broken, diminished, no longer able to encompass the earth or trap his children inside Gaia's body. He rose away from things, became the abstract sky, the remote heaven, the space above everything that can be named but not touched. And before he went completely beyond the reach of words, he turned back and he cursed them with something that was also, because he was still a god even in his ruin, a prophecy. You will suffer what you have done to me. Your own children will rise. What you have won by the sickle, you will lose by the same violence. Generation devouring generation, son overthrowing father, and the wound opened today will echo forward until something is done that cannot be undone. The Titans stood in the open air for the first time. I need to pause here because I want to make sure this lands the way it deserves to. They had never felt open air. They had been imprisoned in the dark interior of their mother's body since before they had a concept of since. And now the sky above them, the sky their father had vacated, the sky that was now just sky, stretched outward in every direction, and the air moved, and the light was there, and they needed a long, geological, divine moment to simply feel what it was to have no walls. Oceanus moved immediately to the perimeter of everything, stretched himself toward the edges of the world with the quality of freed water that finds its level and keeps going and does not stop. He would stay there, always at the far margin, always the boundary you could find if you traveled far enough in any direction and kept walking after the land ran out. Hyperion rose toward the region where brightness was purest, ascending with the particular urgency of a being who had been held from light and was now following it like iron pulled to a magnet, except that image is too mechanical, too small. Forget I said that. Kronos looked at the sickle in his hand, looked at the divine blood still on it, felt the prophecy ring in the air the way certain sounds go on ringing after their source has stopped. Let me collect the thread. The Titans heard the prophecy in the moment of their liberation and felt the words descend into them like stones dropped into deep water, rippling outward through their awareness, even as they spread themselves across the world for the first time, breathing that vertiginous, open air, feeling something that was triumph and grief and guilty knowledge all braided together, because freedom sometimes arrives wearing a face that makes celebration feel wrong. Kronos understood the prophecy completely. He was intelligent in the cold, deep, terrible way that the first things are intelligent, not like human cleverness, which flickers and improvises and finds workarounds, but like geological intelligence, slow, massive, thorough in a way that thoroughness becomes its own kind of horror. He made a decision. He would not be Uranus. He would not press his children back into the dark and wait for their resentment to develop into conspiracy. He would be more efficient than that, more ruthless. He would swallow them. Rhea was his wife now, as Gaia had been wife to Uranus, because in the world's early generations, these categories had not yet separated into the shapes we recognize. She bore him children. The first child was Hestia, goddess of the hearth, sacred fire at the center of every household that would ever exist. Kronos took her from Rhea's arms and swallowed her. The second was Demeter, goddess of the grain, the harvest, the deep seasonal love the earth has for the things that grow from it. Swallowed. The third was Hera, magnificent, complex, the most contradictory of all divine women, queen of everything sacred in marriage and bond. Swallowed. The fourth was Hades. Fifth was Poseidon. 5 times. 5 times Rhea handed a child into the air and the child was gone. I find myself unable to write past that quickly, even though structurally I know I should keep moving. The weight of the 5th time, the particular way arms must feel when they are empty for the 5th time, when the body has already learned, already knows what is about to happen, and does it anyway because what else is there to do? The way a mother's love curdles and transforms when it has nowhere left to go. I don't know if I'm projecting something entirely too human onto a cosmic event. I kept it anyway. Anyway, Rhea went to Gaia, went back to the earth itself, back to the first mother, the one who had felt something adjacent to this and had responded by handing her own son a sickle. Gaia gave her a plan. When the 6th child came, the youngest, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling cloths, a cold, smooth stone in the cloths that should have held her son, and she handed it to Kronos. And Kronos, operating from the blind urgency of fear rather than genuine attention, swallowed it without looking closely. The real child was carried south, to Crete, to a cave on Mount Ida, where the divine goat Amalthea would nurse him, and where her horn, accidentally broken at some point in the rearing of a god. I always picture this as an awkward, almost comic moment. The infant Zeus grabbing at something he shouldn't, though I recognize that's probably... Anyway, the broken horn became the cornucopia, the horn of infinite abundance, the universe's compensatory gesture for violence endured. The child's name was Zeus. The perspective has to shift here, and I want to be honest about why that makes me uncomfortable. Because what we've been watching is the theological view, the view from altitude, forces and patterns and inevitabilities. Clean, comprehensible, safely large. Kronos' view is not clean. He sat on his throne during the age the Greeks called the Golden Age, and I want you to actually hold that phrase, the Golden Age. This is the age Kronos built. This is what his reign produced. Later generations would look back on it with a nostalgia so acute it sat at the border of grief. Mortals under his sky needed no laws, no judges, nothing to transgress. They lived in harmony with the natural order, ate what the earth freely gave, grew old without suffering, died into peaceful sleep. This was what Kronos made. He was a father who was afraid. He was a king who had been told by the sky itself that what he had done would be done to him, and who had decided to prevent the prophecy through the most complete form of control available. He chose to make the future impossible by consuming it entirely. Is this evil? Yes. It is also something else. Something without a clean moral address. Something that sits in the chest with actual weight, because we have all felt, in smaller, private, human architecture of our own fears, the desire to hold so tightly to what we have that the holding becomes the destruction of the thing we were trying to protect. Kronos was the lord of time. This is almost always forgotten. His name in some traditions echoes Kronos, time itself. He ruled time and was terrified of it. He built a golden world. He kept swallowing his children. A god of time who could not stop destroying what he put inside it. A king whose fear and whose love had become, somewhere along the way, the same motion, the same fist. That's the Titans. That's Kronos. That's what we lost when the gods won. Deeper now, into the texture of what followed. The slow building pressure of it. The way things move when tremendous forces have been imprisoned. And the imprisonment is doing what imprisonment always does, which is coil the force tighter, defer it, make the eventual release more violent than the original force warranted. The imprisonment of real things cannot negate their reality. It can only delay it, and the delay has a cost. Zeus grew. In the cave on Mount Ida, he grew the way storms grow, not visible in any single moment, building continuously, the air around him sensing something before the something had a name. The nymphs who cared for him there, the Meliae, daughters of Gaia, born from Uranus's blood, which means they were in some sense his aunts. Though I don't think that category maps cleanly onto any of this. They clashed their shields and spears together whenever the child cried, drowning out the sound so Kronos' agents couldn't locate him, so the eyes of the Lord of Time couldn't find the hidden child in the mountain dark. I've sat with that image more times than I can count, and it still catches somewhere in the chest. Those divine women clanging bronze together in the dark of a cave, covering the crying of a baby god. This is what love looks like when it has no good options. Practical, exhausting, noise-making love. Put your body between the vulnerable thing and the thing that wants to destroy it. Make enough noise. Keep making it. Zeus drank Amalthea's milk. He grew in strength and in a particular kind of intelligence, the kind formed entirely by the circumstances of its formation. He knew he was hidden. He knew he was hunted. He knew there was something in him the Lord of Time considered dangerous enough to have swallowed 5 siblings to prevent. That knowledge does something. Even to a god, it makes you careful in ways that harden into coldness, strategic in ways that harden into ruthlessness. It makes you capable of enormous patience for the sake of necessary violence. He grew in that cave with bronze clashing overhead and 5 swallowed siblings pressing against his awareness from the inside of time itself, imprisoned in their father's body the way their grandfather had once imprisoned their father's siblings in the body of the earth. And when the fullness of his nature reached the point where waiting was no longer tenable, he went to find Kronos. The plan came from Gaia and from Metis. Metis, whose name means cunning, crafty counsel, wisdom of the operative kind, was an Oceanid, daughter of Oceanus and Tethys, and she would become the first wife of Zeus. And she gave him a preparation that, mixed into Kronos' drink, would cause the Lord of Time to vomit up everything he had swallowed. The clinical word is emetic. The clinical word is useless here. Think of what this actually was. Kronos sitting in his golden power, feeling suddenly wrong inside himself, feeling something reverse in the interior of his body. That innermost dark he had believed was the safest place in existence, the prison of his own devising, and then the first of them rising back up. Hestia, first swallowed, first returned, then Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon, each one erupting back into the world fully grown, because divine children held in the body of a Titan do not develop normally, mature somehow in the compressed dark of paternal fear, arrive back into existence as adults, fully inhabited by their own divine natures, shaped by the years in the dark into precisely the gods they needed to be. The dark made them, and then, along with his siblings, came the stone, the cold, smooth stone that Rhea had wrapped in swaddling cloths and handed to Kronos in place of her youngest son. It came up too, and it landed at Delphi, and it was called the Omphalos, the navel of the world, the center point of everything, the marker of the place where the substitution had held and the world had cracked open along a new seam. I need to pause here. 6 gods standing together for the first time, looking at each other with that particular combination of strangeness and recognition. Siblings who had never met, shaped by the same imprisonment, some by the inside of a mountain cave, the others by the inside of their father's body, and now standing in the open air, facing a war that would determine what kind of universe this was going to be. The Titanomachy. 10 years. 10 years sounds like a number. It sits on the timeline like something containable. These were divine years, mythological years, operating on a scale outside anything human calendars were designed to hold. 10 years of a war between beings who had shaped the cosmos in collision with each other is, I find, I can't actually describe this adequately. I keep writing sentences and deleting them. The problem is that the scale defeats language. I'll just say, mountains were used as weapons. Seas were turned against continents. The sky chose sides. The earth split open repeatedly. The fabric of what was possible in existence was tested to its breaking point. And the mortals, the golden mortals of Kronos' age, who had lived without laws or suffering under his sky, fled or hid or prayed or simply endured, because the greatest suffering in any war between powers is almost always borne by those who had nothing to do with its causes. The Titans held Mount Othrys in Thessaly. The Olympians held Mount Olympus. Between them, the world shook for 10 divine years without stopping. Let me collect the thread, because there are individuals here who need to be named, and I keep almost skimming past them in the broad sweep of the war narrative, which would be a failure. They deserve, the Titans who fought, deserve to be seen as individuals, as specific beings, not as a mass of prehistoric power that history needed to overcome. Atlas, son of Iapetus and the Oceanid Clymene, the Titans' greatest general, enormous in strength, brilliant in strategy, inexhaustible in a way that the long decade of the war proved required actual inexhaustibility. He held the Titanic forces together through 10 years of the kind of warfare that should have shattered any coalition, and he did it through the specific combination of physical dominance and tactical intelligence that made him, arguably, the most formidable being on the Titanic side. The Olympians would remember this in a very specific way after the war ended. Zeus gave Atlas a punishment designed with precision. Not chains, not Tartarus. The weight of the sky placed on his shoulders. The sky required to be held forever, forever, in that place where the west meets the edge of the world, the full crushing vault of heaven, pressing down on a body built for war and motion and the company of other vast beings in conflict. This is the kind of punishment that only a very particular intelligence designs, one that takes the precise nature of a being's gifts and turns them into the instrument of endless suffering. Atlas, whose strength had been formidable in battle, would now spend that same strength in purposeless labor. The holding would never end. There would be no victory available in it, no defeat, no conclusion of any kind, just the weight and the standing and the time that never stopped moving, even for the Lord of Time's greatest general. I find that punishment genuinely. I don't have a clean feeling about it. I notice I don't have a clean feeling about it, and I'm leaving that in. Hyperion fought too, Lord of Light, whose radiance in battle must have been. I'm trying to imagine what it looked like when the being whose nature was concentrated luminosity turned that luminosity toward war. I can't fully get there. Blinding doesn't cover it. Coeus fought, Creus fought, and Menoetius, brother of Atlas, also a son of Iapetus, fought with a reckless burning rage so extreme that Zeus struck him down personally with a thunderbolt and sent him to Tartarus. The offense was hubris, and I want to be careful about what that means, because hubris in the ancient understanding was a specific thing, a specific quality of insane, self-destructive courage that has stopped being about winning and started being about the burning itself, the rage that burns hotter than strategy requires. Menoetius had crossed from warrior into something the Greeks found genuinely alarming, a being in love with its own destruction, using war as a kind of self-immolation. That's what Zeus couldn't tolerate, the recklessness beyond purpose. Anyway, some Titans didn't fight for Kronos. Oceanus withdrew, remained at the edges of everything as he always had, flowing around the perimeter of the world, neutral, neither abandoning his siblings nor joining their destruction. I've always moved past Oceanus faster than he probably deserves. There's something in his choice. The oldest of the male Titans, the one with the most claim to authority among them, choosing withdrawal over allegiance to either side, that seems like it should matter more than I've given it space to matter. But here we are. Prometheus had foresight. His foresight told him the Titans would lose, that Kronos' power, however vast, however ancient, however threaded through the very structure of time itself, would not hold against what the Olympians had and were about to have. And so Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus, foresight and hindsight, the two brothers whose names face in exactly opposite temporal directions, which has always struck me as a detail that feels constructed and yet almost certainly wasn't, refused Kronos. They went to Zeus. They brought their gifts, which were knowledge of what was coming and deep understanding of what had already passed. The war still needed something more to tip it. It needed what was waiting in Tartarus. Ouranos had imprisoned certain beings before he had imprisoned the Titans themselves. Beings so extreme in their nature, so radically outside the borders of what existence could accommodate without straining, that even Kronos, when he overthrew his father, had left them below. The Hecatonkaias, the 100-handed ones, Cottus and Brearios and Gyges, each with 100 hands and 50 heads and strength that makes the word strength seem like it was designed for something smaller. And the Cyclopes, the one-eyed craftsmen, Brontes and Steropes and Arges, thunder, lightning, the brightness of the bolt. Their names are their natures. Their names are what they gave to Zeus. Zeus went down into Tartarus and freed them. Freed the beings his grandfather had imprisoned and his father had left imprisoned, and gave them nectar and ambrosia, which had never touched their lips. And the Cyclopes looked at this new god who had come down into the dark to find them, and they made him gifts. The thunderbolt, the weapon that would define him, the thing that made Zeus Zeus in a way that nothing else quite did. Not his authority, not his intelligence, not his children or his marriages or his long catalogue of divine decisions. The thunderbolt, a gift from beings who had been in the dark so long they'd had nothing to do but think about light. The war shifted, the 100-handed ones through mountains, hundreds of hands, hundreds of rocks, continuous, relentless, the kind of assault that has no rhythm a defender can read because the rhythm is everywhere simultaneously. The Titans broke. 10 years of holding, 10 years of Kronos' cold geological intelligence, directing the titanic forces from Orthris, and it broke under the weight of beings who had been waiting in the dark longer than the war had existed. Kronos fell. The Titans who had fought were bound and thrown into Tartarus, into the deepest pit of existence, behind walls of bronze guarded by the 100-handed ones who had just won the war that put them there. The Hecatonkaias became the jailers. Atlas held up the sky. The Olympians took everything. The world reorganized itself around its new rulers, and the golden age ended, and the age of Zeus began, and the laws came, and the judges came, and the things that Kronos' mortals had never needed arrived in force. And somewhere below everything, in the dark behind the bronze walls, the Titans waited in the way that only the most ancient things can wait, without hope as a concept, without despair as a concept, just the waiting itself, vast and patient and very, very old. That's the Titanomachy. That's what winning cost. Gaia told Zeus what she knew, what Ouranos had known and suppressed, what Kronos had inherited as a problem and chosen to leave unsolved. The beings in Tartarus were the key. If Zeus could descend and free them, free the 100-handed ones with their 50 heads and 100 arms apiece, free the Cyclopes with their single burning eyes and their divine craftsmanship, and if he could convince them to fight, the war could end. Zeus descended into Tartarus, which is the deepest thing there is, deeper than the underworld, deeper than the roots of the earth, a space so far below existence that a bronze anvil dropped from the surface would fall for 9 days before it reached bottom. He brought nectar and ambrosia, fed it to beings who had not eaten in time too long to calculate, released their chains, asked for their help. The Cyclopes gave 3 gifts to Zeus: thunder and lightning, his signature, the force of nature made personal; to Hades, the helm of darkness, the cap of invisibility that made the Lord of the Dead completely undetectable; to Poseidon, the trident which could shake the earth and churn the sea and split the foundations of mountains at their roots. The 100-handed ones agreed to fight. The balance shifted. Now try to hold this from the inside. 10 years you have been fighting. You have thrown mountains. You have used rivers as weapons. You have watched your siblings fall and kept going because Kronos' cold, geological intelligence directed you forward, and the alternative was, there was no alternative. You have absorbed everything the Olympians sent and returned each blow with something worse. And then the 100-handed ones arrive. 3 beings each with 100 arms, each capable of hurling 300 stones simultaneously, filling the sky so completely with launched rock that the sky itself becomes a weapon, that mountains disappear under avalanches of thrown stone, that the sea is driven from its bed and fire erupts from the earth's interior in columns. There is a specific quality of comprehension that arrives in that moment. I find I can't describe it cleanly. It's not panic. It's not despair. It's something colder and more total than either. A recognition that the mathematics have permanently changed and will not change back. The Titans broke, in the way a stone wall breaks. First the mortar fails, then one stone shifts, then the stone next to it, and then what stood unified is simply separate heavy pieces falling in the same direction. Kronos fell. Atlas was pulled from his command. One by one the great Titans were bound in adamantine chains and cast into Tartarus, and the Hecatonchires, the very beings whose imprisonment Kronos had inherited from Aranos and had not bothered to undo, were set as guards over them. The beings who had just won the war stood watch over those who had lost it. That symmetry is the kind that only mythological time produces, too precise to seem accidental. Here is where we must stop and acknowledge what has been told and what is still pressing against the surface of the story, still waiting. The Titans are in Tartarus. Zeus has won. The Olympian age has begun, and the Golden Age is over. And what comes after it? The Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the Age of Heroes, the Iron Age in which mortal humans live out their brief and heavy lives, each era diminished from the one before, each age harder, a little grayer, a little more filled with the specific suffering that comes from living in a world where the original generosity has been replaced by law, where abundance has given way to labor, where the sky is no longer a father, but simply the sky. If something in this has moved in you, if you felt the particular weight of recognition pressing against the inside of your chest, then you already know why these stories survive. You know who carries them. Now the question the Titanomachy almost never asks: what happened to each individual Titan, specifically? One by one, when the war ended, what became of them? Because the Titans were not all imprisoned in Tartarus. That is a simplification the story makes for convenience, and it is, like most convenient simplifications, technically useful and spiritually dishonest. Some were imprisoned. Some were transformed. Some were given tasks designed to last forever. Some had chosen the right side early enough to survive with their freedom. And some were dealt with in ways so strange and specific that when you encounter them, the mind goes quiet for a moment in that particular stillness of meeting something genuinely unexpected. Let me collect the thread. Atlas. We've mentioned Atlas. But Atlas deserves more than a mention, and I've been moving past him too fast in the war narrative, which is a failure I want to correct now. Atlas was the greatest of the Titan generals, the one who held the Titanic coalition together across 10 years of the kind of warfare that should have disintegrated any alliance after the first 3. His strength was real and vast, and well documented in the sources. But what made him the general was the intelligence behind the strength, the strategic comprehension, the ability to keep 50-headed, 100-armed beings and ancient titans of incompatible temperaments pointed in the same direction under continuous existential pressure. The Olympians had to work for their victory. Atlas is why. Zeus understood this precisely, and his punishment reflects that precision in a way I find. I don't have a clean feeling about it. I notice I don't, and I'm leaving that in. The sky on Atlas's shoulders, at the western edge of the world, which the ancient Greeks placed at the edge of what we now call the Atlantic Ocean, named for him, which is a detail I always pause at and then keep moving, because if I stay with it, I'll be here another hour. The full weight of the vault of heaven pressing down on a being built for war and motion, and the company of other vast beings in conflict. It is heavy in the specific way a general's burden is heavy when every force he commanded is gone. The Titans he fought alongside are imprisoned. The war he gave everything to is finished. The strength that made him formidable now has one function: keeping sky and earth apart. The function Uranos once served by his own nature. Now it requires the eternal forced labor of a prisoner. No victory possible in the holding. No defeat, no finish line. Only the weight accumulating through divine years that do not end. There is a later story. Perseus, the Medusa's head used as a tool, Atlas turned to stone. But that version belongs to another night. The version that matters here is just Atlas holding. The greatest warrior of the Titans reduced to the function of architecture. What endures after everything has been taken? I need to pause here, because Prometheus is next, and Prometheus is the one I've been wanting to get to since I started this section, and I find I have to be careful about how much space I give him, because if I'm honest, I would spend the rest of the night just on Prometheus. So I'm going to try to be measured. I'm probably going to fail at being measured. Prometheus did not fight for Kronos. His foresight told him the Titans would lose, and he chose accordingly, went to the Olympians, fought on Zeus's side, and was rewarded with something more complex than punishment, with freedom, with access between the divine world and the mortal one, with a particular mobility that came from having bet correctly on the outcome of a cosmic war. And Prometheus used this freedom. He took fire, went to Olympus, or to the wheel of the sun. The sources disagree, and I've stopped trying to adjudicate between them, and took the divine fire, the celestial fire, the one Zeus had decided to withhold from mortal humans. Whether that decision was petulance or strategy or some divine calculation we can't fully audit from this distance, I genuinely don't know. Zeus withheld fire from humanity. Prometheus hid it in the hollow of a fennel stalk and carried it down. In giving fire to mortals, he gave them warmth, light, the ability to cook, to smelt metal, to survive cold that would otherwise kill them. He also gave them, and this is the part that I think actually enraged Zeus, the part underneath the theft, the technology of civilization, the tool by which they would eventually build everything, know everything. reached toward the sky that had once belonged exclusively to the gods and would eventually, in ways that the ancient Greeks couldn't have. But I won't go there. That's not this story. Point is, fire was not just fire. Anyway, Zeus found out. Of course he did. And the punishment he built for Prometheus is the most viscerally horrible of all divine punishments in this tradition. And I want to be accurate about why, because it's easy to say the eagle eating his liver and have it land as simply gruesome rather than as the precise and sadistic architecture it actually was. Chained to a mountain in the Caucasus, the eastern edge of the known world, the place where the familiar becomes the strange. Adamantine chains, the same chains that held the Titans in Tartarus, but not in Tartarus, in the open air, in the exposure to sky and weather, and the full experience of time moving, which is its own refinement of cruelty for a being who could see forward through time and therefore knew every morning exactly what was coming. Every day the eagle arrived, divine, enormous, sent by Zeus. It ate the liver of Prometheus. Every night the liver grew back. Every morning the eagle came again. This was designed to be infinite, designed as the wound that could never close, the suffering that could never metabolize into something useful, because the suffering never paused long enough for anything like wisdom or distance or the ordinary psychological processing that even the worst pain eventually allows. The liver regenerates. The eagle returns. The liver regenerates. The design of it is like a clock, like a gear system. It's like nothing else. That's actually the point. There is no existing analogy for a torture engineered to defeat the ordinary mercy of time by a being who is himself the Lord of Time's replacement. Prometheus could see the future. He knew a secret about Zeus's own fate, knew something about a son who would overthrow him, the prophecy that had already eaten Kronos alive, and he did not tell it. Held it behind his teeth through every day the eagle came. That's the other thing the punishment was for. The other layer of it. Zeus needed the secret, and Prometheus held it anyway, chained to his mountain at the edge of the world, liver gone by midday, watching the sun cross the sky he had stolen fire from. The chains held for a very long time. Heracles eventually broke them. But that's much later. That's another story and another layer of what the Greeks were working out about power and suffering and what heroism is actually for. For now, Prometheus on the mountain, the eagle descending, the liver, the night, the liver, the knowledge of what was coming, held in the chest of a being who could not be killed, could not be freed, could not be made to speak, and would not. That's the wound that never closed. That's what the Olympians built their age on top of. That's the thing pressing against the door. It went on for a very long time. Some sources say 30 years. Some say 30,000. The disparity in the number. I've stopped trying to resolve it. What matters is the quality of the time, the texture of each day, the particular way an eagle's beak feels against flesh that has learned to expect it, that has stopped flinching, that has found in the expectation itself a new and different kind of horror than the wound. Prometheus did not recant. This needs to be said clearly because the story has a way of moving past it too quickly in its rush toward the eventual rescue. He did not recant. He knew exactly what Zeus wanted from him because Prometheus had a prophecy folded inside his foresight, a secret about Zeus's own future, about a child who would overthrow him the way Zeus had overthrown Kronos. Zeus wanted the name of the mother to avoid, and Prometheus, chained to his mountain with an eagle eating him daily, knew this and would not give it. The foresight that had guided him to Zeus's side in the Titanomachy was now being used against Zeus, not as a weapon exactly, as refusal. The most radical form of refusal available to a being whose body had been turned into a daily theatre of destruction, the withholding of knowledge from the one doing the destroying. Eventually, Heracles would come, the arrow, the eagle, the chains broken. But that is its own story, its own night, its own weight. We're not there yet. Prometheus, the hindsight brother, the one who understood what had already happened, rather than what was approaching, was given a gift by Zeus after the war. A woman. Pandora, the first woman, fashioned rather than born, assembled from earth and water and divine intent, given beauty by Aphrodite and cunning by Hermes, and some gift from every god on Olympus. Her name means all gifted or all giving, depending on how you hold the Greek. She was also given a jar, a large storage vessel that later translators mistranslated as a box. Pythos is the word, a storage jar, the kind you'd seal grain in, and inside it everything that existence had held in suspension, waiting, disease and labor and old age and strife and hunger and all the 10,000 specific flavors of suffering that the Golden Age had kept out of the world. Prometheus had been warned. Prometheus, before the mountain, before the chains, had told him directly, do not accept gifts from Zeus. Do not. Prometheus had the gift of hindsight, which means he was very good at understanding why things had gone wrong after they already had. He looked at Pandora and forgot everything. Forgot the warning, forgot his brother's voice, forgot everything except the immediate and perfectly calibrated fact of her standing in front of him. And he accepted her, because of course he did, because the gods had designed her specifically to be accepted, which is the detail I find hardest to sit with and which I notice I keep circling back to without knowing quite what to do with it. The way she was built to be irresistible as part of the punishment. That's worth a longer conversation than I can give it tonight. Pandora opened the jar. Everything rushed out, all of it dispersing into existence in ways that could not be reversed, could not be captured, could not be returned to their container. Real things, once released, do not go back. One thing remained. Elpis, hope, still in the jar when Pandora closed it. And the question this detail has been asking for 25 centuries, the one I find genuinely unresolvable, the one I've read 20 different philosophers attempt and come away from each time feeling like the jar is still closed, is whether the hope remained because it was the last mercy, the consolation that makes all the suffering endurable, the one gift that stayed when everything else escaped, or whether hope remained in the jar because hope is itself one of the evils, the most seductive one, the thing that keeps suffering humanity reaching toward futures that will not arrive, that holds the wound open by refusing to let despair complete its work and deliver the strange relief of lost expectation. I don't know. I genuinely don't know, and I've stopped pretending I do. The jar is still closed. The question is still open. Now the Titans in Tartarus. Let me collect the thread. because I want to do this carefully. What was it like to be Kronos, the lord of time, in a place where time does not move correctly, in Tartarus, where the ordinary rhythms of existence lose their shape, where the measure of time that Kronos himself had once commanded becomes meaningless noise? What was it like to be Hyperion, the one above, the lord of light above all things, in a place so deep that no light reached it? Coeus and Creus, vast intelligences that had encompassed entire domains of divine understanding, reduced to a single, dimensionless, endless dark. The Hecatonchires stood guard. Cottus and Briareos and Gyges, each with their 50 heads and 100 arms, loyal to Zeus, not out of love, but out of the practical comprehension of beings who had themselves been imprisoned, freed, and had no intention of returning to chains. They stood at the bronze gates. They were the walls and the wardens both, and the Titans felt them there the way the imprisoned feel their guards, not directly, not personally, but as a quality of the surrounding space, a confirmation that the containment is real and the watching is continuous and the door is not something to build plans around. There is a tradition, and I find it genuinely beautiful and also genuinely heartbreaking, and I can't decide which feeling is more accurate, so I'm leaving both in. That says Zeus eventually relented. That after enough divine years had accumulated, after whatever cosmological audit determined the punishment had run its necessary course, he released the Titans from Tartarus, sent some of them to the Isles of the Blessed, the paradise at the western edge of the world, where the heroic dead also went. No labor, no suffering, constant warmth, fruit without cultivation, air that was itself a kind of mercy. In some versions of this tradition, Kronos rules there, the lord of the golden age, the god of time who swallowed his children, now the peaceful king of the paradise of the dead, presiding over heroes who died well in a place of perpetual afternoon. That version of Kronos sits in the chest in a complicated way. It doesn't resolve anything, doesn't undo what he did to Rhea, to Hestia, to Demeter and Hera and Hades and Poseidon and the stone that stood in for his youngest son. But it suggests something about what divine justice looks like when it has finished being violent. A long, terrible arc that bends eventually toward a kind of rest. Anyway, Atlas does not get the Isles of the Blessed. We must return to Atlas. Atlas's story is the sky, only and always the sky, pressing down with the weight of everything above the world, the stars, which are divine fire and infinite remove, the planets in their circuits, the weight of the celestial dome that separates ordered existence from the chaos still pressing against it from outside, and the weight of night when night comes, and the weight of day, and the weight of the in-between times, dusk and dawn, which may be the heaviest because they hold both at once. I don't know why I keep fixating on the dawn being heavy. Something about it feels right, and I've left it in every draft. He stands at the western edge. The sun passes him every day in its descent, Helios in his chariot, going down toward the ocean stable where his horses rest before the next circuit. Atlas watches this daily. Helios does not stop. The chariot does not slow. The descent of the sun is a transaction between the sun and the sky and the sea, and is entirely indifferent to the figure at the edge holding the vault of heaven with arms that were built for war. Nothing changes. The years move in the way years move when the one counting them has no reason to count. Then Heracles came. Here's where the energy in me picks back up, because I love this story with a perhaps embarrassing specificity, the sheer situational cleverness of what happens next, the way the myth suddenly has the structure of a very old joke, which makes it feel true in a completely different register than the preceding weight. Heracles needed the apples of the Hesperides, which grew in a garden tended by Atlas's daughters at the western edge of the world. And Heracles, wanting the apples and being smart enough to understand the shape of the problem in front of him, made Atlas a proposition. He would hold the sky while Atlas walked to his daughter's garden and retrieved the apples himself, just temporarily, just for the duration of the errand. Atlas agreed. He placed the sky on Heracles' shoulders, felt the weight leave him, felt the space above his shoulders suddenly and shockingly empty, which must have been relief and vertigo and grief arriving simultaneously like three people through the same door. And he walked to the garden, picked up the apples, stood in the air without the sky above him, felt something move in him that I think the sources don't quite name because they don't have the right word for it. The sudden, intoxicating possibility of simply not going back. He told Heracles he'd take the apples to Eurystheus himself, the king who'd assigned the labors, and Heracles could just stay there, holding the sky. It would be fine. There's something, almost. The look on Heracles' face at this point is not recorded anywhere. I've always wanted it to be. But what he did next is recorded, which is that he thought about it for approximately the amount of time it takes to recognize the only available exit from a situation. And then he said, certainly, he'd stay. But could Atlas hold the sky for just a moment? Just while he adjusted his lion skin, it wasn't sitting right for the purpose of sky holding. The shoulder arrangement was awkward, just for a moment. And Atlas took the sky back, took it in the instinctive way of a body that knows its own burden, the way you catch a thing thrown at you before you've decided to, and the weight settled back onto his shoulders, and Heracles picked up the apples and walked away. Atlas stood at the western edge of the world with the sky on his shoulders. The sun moved through its arc. Nothing changed. The apples were gone. Heracles was gone. The moment of the sky being held by someone else was gone, slipped back into the accumulating weight of all the moments he'd stood here already, undifferentiated now, as unreachable as the stars he was holding up. The years continued. He stood. The sky pressed down. He held it. What does Atlas think about? Their ancient sources don't ask this. They are concerned with events. What happened? Who acted? What was done and to whom? The interior experience of a being condemned to a specific function for an incomprehensible duration is not their project. But we can ask it here, in whatever dark room contains your breathing right now, in the particular quality of attention that loosens when you're tired enough that the usual boundaries of the mind start going soft. Does he think about the war, the Titanomachy, the decade of combat, the decisions made and unmade, the moments when the Titan forces almost and then didn't? Does he replay it the way military minds replay battles, looking backward for the pivot point, the decision that could have gone otherwise, the moment that felt contingent but wasn't? Does he think about his brothers? Prometheus on his mountain in the Caucasus, Epimetheus in the mortal world, with Pandora and the open jar and everything that followed from it, Menoetius in Tartarus, struck down for the specific crime of burning too hot, of rage that had crossed from strategy into self-immolation. Does he think about his daughters, the Hesperides, tending their golden apple tree at the garden at the world's edge, singing their evening song somewhere within earshot of where he stands? Does he hear them? In the clear western air, in the stillness that belongs to the edge of everything, does the singing of his daughters reach him? And does it make the holding easier or harder? Does he think about what would happen if the sky were taken from him truly, not through the trick Heracles managed, but permanently through some divine revision, Zeus arriving at the western edge and saying, "Enough, put it down, we're changing the arrangement"? Could he? Has the holding changed him so completely that sky and body have become a single system, that releasing the sky would not feel like liberation, but like dissolution, the removal of the only remaining fact that defines the shape of his existence? These questions have no answers. They're the questions the myth places inside the image of Atlas and then looks away from. The questions you carry when the lamp goes out and the sounds of the ordinary world slow down and something vast and old presses against the underside of your thinking and won't be named and won't leave. Prometheus on his mountain. The eagle comes. This is the structure of his days. Arrival of the eagle, departure of the eagle, the regeneration in between, the waiting for the arrival again. The circular, purposeless, perfectly designed calendar of his punishment. But Prometheus has his foresight, and his foresight can see beyond the daily eagle, can see the far end of his suffering, the day the chains break, the moment Heracles arrives, and the arrow flies. He can see it. He knows his liberation is coming, and he is still chained, and the eagle still comes. And the question this raises, what it means to know that suffering will end while you are still completely inside the suffering, is one I find I can't dispatch quickly, because it has a relevance that bleeds out of mythology and into something more immediate, something about what it means to be told this will pass while it is still passing, and to find in that knowledge almost no relief at all. Prometheus holds his secret, the name of the woman whose son will overthrow Zeus. This is what he has. This is the axis the entire imprisonment turns on. Zeus could free him at any moment, has the power, has the authority, and all he would need in return is the name. The specific form of the prophecy Prometheus has been carrying since before the war, since before his choice of sides, since the beginning of his existence as the being who sees forward and must decide what to do with that seeing. He doesn't give it 30 years on the mountain, or 30,000. The eagle comes, the eagle departs, the liver grows back, and Prometheus, who can see the future, who has seen the moment of his liberation, who knows what Heracles will do, and approximately when, waits. The waiting is its own argument. The waiting is the statement. Some secrets are worth more than the end of suffering. Some knowledge is so consequential, so far-reaching in what depends on its remaining unspoken, that even the eagle, the daily, perfect, compounding repetition of the eagle, is an acceptable price for keeping it inside your chest. I need to pause here because we're moving into the section I find hardest to write and also the most necessary, and I want to get it right. Let me collect the thread. What were the Titans at the deepest level? Not mythologically, cosmologically, in terms of what they represent in the actual structure of existence. Because the Titans are the story's architecture, the forces the story was built to contain and explain. Each one corresponds to something fundamental in the nature of reality. And when I say corresponds, I don't mean loosely, symbolically, the way we wave at metaphor from a safe distance. I mean something more structural, something the Greeks were genuinely reaching toward when they assembled these figures from the elements of their experience and gave them divine form. Oceanus is the totality of the world's waters. The fact that water surrounds and permeates everything, that it is the condition of all biological life, that the ancient world knew itself encircled by ocean and knew that the ocean was both boundary and passage, that what looked like the end of the world at the horizon was also the beginning of somewhere else. Chaos is the intelligence of the cosmos. The fact that there is order and the order can be understood, that the sky has an axis, that the stars move in patterns, that the universe presents its non-randomness to the mind that looks carefully enough. Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus. I'm going to be honest. I always move through these three faster than I should, because the ones on either side of them pull harder on my attention, and the middle tends to compress. Crius is the celestial mechanism, the constellations as cosmic clock, the stars as the original calendar by which everything was timed. Hyperion is the principle of light itself, the fundamental fact that existence is visible, that things present themselves to perception, that there is brightness in the world that allows it to be known. Iapetus is mortality, the terrible and defining gift eventually given to humankind, the fact of limit and ending, the horizon that gives everything on this side of it its weight and urgency and the specific flavor of meaning that only finite things can have. Anyway, Themis is the law. And here I want to slow down, because Themis tends to get summarized as justice, and that's too small. She's the deeper law, the law of how things actually are and therefore must be treated, the law that was never enacted by anyone because it predates the concept of enactment. It simply is. The way the direction of gravity is, the way the ground is. You don't vote on it. You discover it, and then you either live in accordance with it, or you suffer the particular consequences of having tried to arrange reality differently than reality is arranged. Then, mnemosyne, memory. And this is the one I want to spend time on, because I think it's the one that's most consistently underestimated, treated as the quiet titan, while the others get the dramatic billing, when in fact, mnemosyne is the one whose gift makes all the others. No, let me try that differently. Without mnemosyne, nothing any of the other titans represents can accumulate into meaning. Oceanus flows, Hyperion illuminates, Iapetus limits. But without memory, each experience is pure succession, event following event with no thread between them. No capacity to know this moment is related to that one. No pattern, no wisdom, no story. Mnemosyne's daughters were the 9 muses, all art, all music, all philosophy, all science, all the ways human beings have tried to make experience into something that persists beyond the moment of its occurrence. These are her daughters. Every one of them is an act of memory, an act of carrying what has been forward into what comes next, of refusing to let time take everything and leave nothing. To tell a myth is to perform her function. To write any of this down is to embody her. And this is why, and I realize, I'm about to say something that sounds larger than I can support at this hour, but I'm leaving it in. This is why the Titans still exist. Not because the ancient Greeks were sophisticated enough to preserve them, though they were. Because memory is the force that keeps real things from disappearing into time. Mnemosyne is the reason the Titans survive. Memory is the Titan who won. And then there is Rhea. Rhea, who endured the swallowing of her children and handed her husband a stone in swaddling cloths, and went to her mother for a plan and stood in a cave on Crete, listening to nymphs clash their shields together to cover the sound of a god crying. What is Rhea? Her name means flow, the current of becoming, the way existence moves through time in continuous streams that find their way around obstacles through persistence rather than force, through the patient, unhurried, unstoppable quality of water seeking its level. She's like a river that swallows entire fallen trees and continues, which doesn't quite land, I know, but there's something in the ungainliness of it that feels closer to the truth than any cleaner image I've tried. Rhea is what continues beneath the violence, beneath the swallowing, beneath the stone and the deception and the decade of war and the eventual overthrow and all the subsequent ages that diminished from the first one. Beneath all of it, the same current, different in form, different in what it carries, having left things behind and taken new things up, but the same deep moving quality of existence that was always going to find its way, that could not be stopped by fear, that could not be imprisoned by the desperate hunger of those who tried to hold it still. She endured. She flows. She's still flowing. That's the Titans. That's what they were. She is the mother principle at its most extreme and most resilient. She loved each swallowed child completely and separately, and without the diminishment that prolonged loss tends to produce in human parents. The numbness, the protective detachment, the slow armoring of feeling that happens when love keeps getting destroyed, and the organism has to find a way to survive that. Rhea did not do that. She did not love the sixth child less for having lost 5. She loved Zeus with the same completeness she had loved Hestia, the first. And she acted. The stone in the cloths, the plan from Gaia, the cave in Crete. These are the acts of love that has absorbed every blow and converted it, not into rage, not into despair, into something more patient, more precise, more effective. The flow that finds the gap in the rock, the current that carries everything lost as a kind of stored potential, moving toward an arrival it can't yet see. We carry her, those of us who have lost things and kept moving. We carry her every time we find the gap. Phoebe held the oracle at Delphi before Apollo came and made it his. She represents intuitive knowledge, the kind that arrives from somewhere underneath reasoning, from a faculty the conscious mind cannot fully account for and doesn't entirely control. The oracle itself predated even Phoebe. It was older than the Titans, born from Gaia, the earth pressing its knowledge upward through a crevice in the rock, vapors rising from below, carrying something that the right kind of mind could receive and translate into words, into prophecy, into the form of knowing that the future offers to those willing to hold it without demanding it arrive legibly. Phoebe held this and kept it, and eventually passed it to her grandson Apollo, because divine inheritances in this tradition don't get destroyed. They get handed on, transformed in the transmission, bearing the mark of every consciousness they've moved through while retaining their essential nature. The prophecy Oranos gave Kronos. The prophecy Prometheus carried about Zeus. The thread of bright seeing that runs through the entire story, appearing in different hands, doing the same essential work, showing the future to those capable of seeing it, and then watching what they do with the seeing. The seeing is always Phoebe. What they do with it is everything else. Theia gave brightness to precious things, gold, silver, the gleam on the surface of moving water, the quality of light that makes certain moments in certain landscapes feel lit from inside rather than merely illuminated. Her children were Helios, Selene, and Eos, the sun, the moon, the dawn, three organizing lights of the sky, the clock, the calendar, the tide maker, the source of agricultural possibility and morning dew. Theia made them luminous. Without Theia, they're astronomical objects. They mean nothing. Theia is the reason they mean anything at all. I want to move now to the hollow, at the center of the Olympian victory, which is the part of this story I think about most and which I've found hardest to write toward. Every time I try to approach it directly, the prose goes stiff. So I'm just going to go. The Olympians won. Zeus sits on his throne. Poseidon has the sea, Hades the underworld, Demeter the harvest, Hera the sacred bonds of marriage, and then the rest of the 12, arranged in their domains, the whole cosmic order sorted and assigned and administered. Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Hermes, Dionysus, who has the vine and the dissolution and the particular liberation that comes from temporarily losing the walls of the self. The Olympians have everything. They have order, they have law, they have the cosmos arranged according to their natures and agreements and the elaborate, frequently violated protocols of their relationships with each other. What the Golden Age had was something that order cannot produce and law cannot guarantee. The Greeks called it, I'm reaching for the right word here, and I keep almost landing on euandria, which is the flourishing of human beings in full expression of their nature. But in the age of Kronos, it was something more than human flourishing, something that had the cosmos itself at its center, the sense that the world was abundant, that the earth gave freely, that time moved like a river with no urgent destination, rather than like a blade cutting through existence, leaving behind it the continuous open wound of elapsed moments that can't be recovered. The Golden Age mortals needed no laws because there was nothing to transgress. They grew old gently. They died into peaceful sleep. The cosmos, and this is the part I find I can't make small or qualify into something manageable. The cosmos felt arranged for their benefit. It felt like it loved them. I need to pause here, because what I'm about to say is the center of everything, and I don't want to rush it. The Olympians' victory is exactly the loss of that. The transition from a world that loves you to a world that is indifferent to you. Divine order was achieved, real order, genuine structure, the cosmos organized into meaning. And the cost of it was the sense of cosmic love. The Titans were the garden. The Olympians are the management of the property the garden used to be. You can admire the management, genuinely, intelligently, philosophically admire what Olympian order accomplished, the way it organized chaos into structure, gave the cosmos a legible shape, made law out of what had been force, and still feel, underneath the admiration, the loss of the thing that preceded it. The loss of the Golden Age is the original human grief. It is the source of every subsequent nostalgia, every feeling in every generation that something essential has been taken, that things were better before, that the world has aged past its own best version of itself. Every generation that has felt, that has been feeling the Titans, feeling it in their bodies, feeling it without knowing what they were feeling or where it came from, or that it had a name as old as the name of the sky. Anyway, where do you feel this? Where in your own life, your own private mythology, the story you carry so close you've stopped being able to see its shape? Where is the Titan and where is the Olympian? What in you is the vast and luminous thing that was formed before the ordering happened, that carries the memory of abundance, of openness, of a time before the rules arrived and calcified into the architecture of every subsequent day? And what in you is the Olympian, the organized, the law-making, the thing that won its particular internal war and now administers its victory, and sometimes, in the daily management of what it achieved, forgets what the achieving cost? These are questions that don't resolve. They don't land in actionable insight or clean next steps. They're the kind that sit in you like a stone in a river that has been there long enough that the water doesn't go around it anymore. But through it, through the space, the stone's presence has gradually hollowed. That image is almost right and not quite. I kept it anyway. The tempo slows now. It slows the way breath slows when the body decides rest is more necessary than vigilance, when the deep animal intelligence of the organism overrides the conscious mind's preference for watchfulness and begins, without asking permission, to wind things down. The Titans breathe with this slowing. They are, in some fundamental way, the force behind it, because they are the forces behind all things. And the force that pulls consciousness down into rest is as ancient as any of them, as much a part of the original architecture as the light above, or the water at the world's edges, or the memory that holds all of it together in the shape of something that can be told. When you sleep, you return to something. When the day's organizing principle lets go, when the Olympian administration of your interior life takes its temporary leave, something older moves into the space, not dangerously, with the quality of presence that the very ancient carry. Presence that has no need to announce itself, that is simply there, the way bedrock is there, beneath soil, beneath roots, beneath the foundations of everything built on top of it. That bedrock, that is what we have been circling this whole night. Consider Tethys, the least spoken of the Titans, which is itself interesting, and I've never quite figured out why she gets so little. Maybe because her nature is so thoroughly distributed through the world that she's hard to point at, hard to locate in a single image, the way you can locate Atlas or Prometheus. She was the wife of Oceanus. mother of 3,000 oceanids and 3,000 river gods, who together constitute the fresh water of the world. She and Oceanus encircled everything together, the great river and its banks, the going outward and the coming back, two aspects of the same continuous motion. And their children were every freshwater river and stream in existence, every tributary and spring and deep lake, the entire network of drinkable water through which all surface life was conducted. Tethys is in the water you drink. In the understanding of the world that produced these stories, she was the actual divine substance of fresh water, the organizing intelligence within it, the quality that made it flow toward the lowest point rather than stand still, that made it fill hollows and keep moving. That quality has not changed. The water still flows, the rivers still run, the springs still well up from below. Tethys does what the water does. She moves, she nourishes, she circulates, she is everywhere that life is. She is the taken for granted fact of everything that lives. You would notice her only if she stopped. Coeus was the axis of heaven, the intelligence of the celestial sphere, the organizing principle of the sky's structure, the fact that the sky had a north and south, and between them, an axis around which everything rotated with measurable precision, the precision that eventually gave human beings the ability to predict eclipses, to navigate by stars, to understand that the universe had a knowable structure. He was the reason the constellations held their shapes year to year, the axis of heaven, now chained in the space beneath the concept of axis, and yet the stars still held their positions. This is the strangest and most important thing about what happened to all of them, and I find I keep coming back to it. Their natures did not stop operating because they were imprisoned. The world continued carrying the Titanic imprint, the way a landscape carries the imprint of a glacier that retreated 10,000 years ago, in the rounded hills, in the U-shaped valleys, in the particular way the land lies that could only have been made by the pressure of something enormous moving over it very slowly. The Titans gave their natures to the world so constitutively that removing the Titans could not remove the Titanic qualities, because the world had become those qualities. The world is the gift the Titans gave themselves away to make. I don't know a cleaner way to say that. I've tried several. The voice drops now, not as a technique, just because this is where the story goes, and the voice follows it there, down into slower sentences, wider silences, the place where what cannot be said in words starts pressing against the edges of what can. There is a question that has been present through the whole of this story. In every name, every act of divine violence and divine endurance, every imprisonment and every gift and every punishment designed with the particular intelligence of a God who understood exactly how to make the wound fit the wound bearer. The question is this: what is the relationship between the enormous and the intimate? Between the Titans, beings formed before the world was finished, containing within themselves the organizational principles of existence, imprisoned, not because they were evil, but because what they represented was incompatible with a certain kind of order, and the small, close, particular experience of being one human being in a dark room at the end of one more day. What does Atlas's sky have to do with the weight on your shoulders? What does Prometheus's fire have to do with the thing you found or made or carried down from wherever you found it and gave to someone who needed it? What does Kronos' swallowing have to do with the way you hold the future? All the futures you cannot control, cannot predict, cannot prevent from arriving with their load of change and the requirement to adapt or fail. What does Mnemosyne, memory herself, have to do with the stories you tell yourself in the dark? The ones that replay when everything else goes quiet. The ones you've been telling so long you can't remember the first time. The ones that have become so thoroughly part of your interior architecture that you no longer notice them as stories but experience them as simply true. I need to pause here, because what comes next is the part I find hardest to write, and I want to approach it without rushing it into something smaller than it is. Let me collect the thread. The room is quieter now. Your body is slower. The boundary between yourself and the dark is less defended than it was when this began. Less invested in maintaining the precise outline of where you end and the night starts. This is the direction of sleep, this gradual, generous blurring. And the Titans are at home in it, because the Titans predate edges. They existed before the sky was separate from the earth, before inside and outside had been fully distinguished, before Olympian precision organized the cosmos into clearly delineated territories. In the pre-Titanic space, in the chaos from which Gaia and the rest eventually emerged, there were no edges, only the pressure of one thing against another, the aching absence of form pressing against the equally aching absence of its own absence, until form came, until Gaia came, pulling herself from the void, establishing the first edge, the surface of the earth, the line between ground and air. And even that edge, that first one, was in some sense a membrane rather than a wall, because Gaia went down as far as she went up, and the depth of the earth was as dimensionless as the height of the sky, and through the surface between them, things passed in both directions. Volcanic fire rising, rain falling, seeds going down and coming back as grain, the dead going in and coming back as what? As other things, as food that feeds what lives, as the memory that lives in soil, of everything that has lived in it before. Every edge since then has had this quality underneath its apparent precision. A meeting point, a place where the pressure on one side communicates with the pressure on the other, where what is below knows what is above. Anyway, below, always and finally below. The Titans in Tartarus are below. Below the underworld, below the roots of the earth, below the level at which ordinary concepts of below still apply. 9 days for the bronze anvil, falling through the darkness beneath dark, through cold beneath cold, through a distance that makes distance itself seem local and manageable. And in that below, the Titans breathe. Here is the question that the story cannot answer and must not answer, because the moment it's answered, it becomes a proposition rather than a living thing, a conclusion rather than an opening. What is it to be divine and imprisoned? What is it to be the organizing principle of an aspect of existence and to be separated from the existence you organize? What is it to be Koos, the intelligence of the heavens, in a place beneath the heavens? What is it to be Hyperion, the Lord of all light, in a place beyond light's reach? What is it to be Kronos, the very nature of time, in a place where time has stopped moving the way it moves above, where the ordinary sequence of before and after has has been replaced by something with no good name, a simultaneity of imprisonment, a present tense so extended and undifferentiated that past and future both dissolve into it, leaving only the weight of chains, only the hecaton cars at the bronze gates, only the breathing in the dark. What remains when everything you were for has been taken, when the domain you organized has been reorganized without you, in your absence, and has continued beautifully, has continued carrying your organizing principles forward, while you are below it all, still entirely real, still entirely yourself, and yet toward what? In service of what? The stars still turn, the water still runs, the light still falls across the world every morning. The Titanic qualities persist in everything that exists. Coeus's intelligence is in the structure of the sky. Hyperion's principle is in every photon that arrives. Tethys moves through every watershed that feeds anything alive. What they were for, it continues. The world is still doing it. They just aren't there to see it. I don't know what that is. The story doesn't know. I've sat with this section longer than any other, and I still don't have a word for it that feels adequate. Not tragedy exactly, not peace exactly, something that contains both and is resolved by neither. I kept the question anyway. It felt dishonest to smooth it into something answerable. This is what the story leaves in you when it finishes. This particular question, or its echo, or its translation into the specific terms of your own life. Because you have a version of this question, a version shaped by your own domains, your own organizing purposes, the things you were for that have changed or been taken or simply moved forward without you the way existence moves forward, without everything eventually. What endures in you when that happens? What persists in you the way Coeus's intelligence persisted in the stars? This is not a question for answering tonight. It is a question for carrying, for taking with you into the place where the ordinary categories of waking experience stop applying so strictly. Sleep comes the way the tide comes, without announcing itself, touching first the lowest places, the edges where the resistance has already softened, and then gradually, steadily, the rest, until the whole shore is covered, and the question that felt sharp-edged in the daylight has gentled at its margins, and the breathing has slowed, and the body has made its ancient wordless decision that the day is done. The night is here. The holding can, for now, be released. Now, the return. The story. No, let me say it differently. The story bends back toward where it started, because that's what real stories do. And if you've been with me long enough, you already feel it happening. The slight curve in the telling. The sense of a hand reaching back towards something set down at the beginning of the night. We open this. We opened it with the claim that most people have the Titans wrong, that most people carry them as villains, as the discarded machinery of a more primitive cosmology, obstacle figures, defeated things. And I said, no, didn't I say that? I said it. And then I had to earn it across all the nights since. And I'm not sure I've fully earned it even now, standing here at the end with the thread running back through my hands. Let me try to say what we found. Kronos, who built the golden world and then couldn't stop eating his own future. The fear and the love weren't separate operations in him. That's the thing I kept trying to get at. The thing I'm not certain I ever quite landed. They were the same motion. He swallowed his children with the same instinct that made him hold them. I don't know if that makes him sympathetic. I kept it in anyway, the complexity of it, because it felt true. Atlas. What Atlas does is not punishment in any clean sense. It's a transformation so total that the original shape of it, the defeat, the sentence, the imposed weight, has dissolved into something else across the uncountable centuries. And what remains is the image. Just the image. A figure holding up what cannot be put down. That's what we reach for when we want to describe a certain kind of endurance. Not because we chose the image deliberately, but because it is the most accurate image. Because it is exactly what that endurance looks like. Prometheus stole fire. Not from. I want to be careful here, because I've gotten this wrong in conversation before, flattened it too quickly. He didn't steal it from simple goodness. He stole it from foresight. He had seen what humanity would need, seen forward into the cold. And the love for that future neediness was stronger than whatever self-preservation would have told him to do. That's a stranger place to act from than heroism. I find it more interesting than heroism. I stayed with it longer than I probably needed to. Mnemosyne. Memory as a titan. I don't think I can improve on what's already been said about her. But let me say it once more, because it deserves to be said in plain terms at the end. The reason any of this exists, the reason this story has lasted 25 centuries, is not accident. Memory is not a passive archive. She is a force. She is vast. She is indestructible. And she cannot be imprisoned into silence. Not permanently. Not actually. Anyway, Rhea moves through loss. That's the whole of it. She carries her love forward through the swallowing of everything she has made, and she does not become what she endures. I find that I'm not sure why this one catches me differently than the others, but it does. Something about the motion of it, the not becoming. Let me collect the thread here for a moment. What I've been trying to say across all of it is this. The Titans were the first version. The world before it organized itself, before it grew afraid of what it was generating, before it started administering its own abundance. And when that world ended, when it was defeated, when the golden age became the administered age, that was not a victory in any uncomplicated sense. It was necessary, maybe. The Olympian order has made possible real things, but the loss of what came before it is still a loss. You don't have to celebrate the loss because you appreciate what the loss made room for. Here is where I admit. This next part is hard to hold in language without it becoming a speech, and I am very tired of speeches, so I'll try to just say it. Mourn it. The loss of the golden age. Honor it the way Atlas honors the weight. Not comfortably, not without cost, not without the weight of it shaping how you stand and how you move through your days. But carry it. Keep carrying it. Because what was real does not stop being real when it ends. Because what was true doesn't stop being true when something overwrites it. The Titans are in the rock beneath everything. Still, they are pressing upward with the particular and inextinguishable force of things that happened and cannot be unhappened. There are questions this story leaves open. Whether Kronos was victim or father or warning, whether the golden age was better or just different on a scale too enormous for better and worse to apply. What Prometheus thought about during the long wait. What Rhea felt, when the sixth child was born, when the plan was already in motion. I don't have answers for those. I kept the questions. The questions belong to the dark. They are what the dark is for. The organizing logic of the day releases its grip, and the enormous old pre-Olympian space inside you opens up, and the Titans breathe, and the questions stop needing to resolve into anything. If this story found something in you, if it passed through you and left some residue, some faint quality of having been briefly adjacent to something older and larger than the calendar, then it did what it came to do. The next episode is Prometheus Freed, the full weight of what it means to be released from a punishment that has become, across incomprehensible duration, the entire architecture of your existence. What it means when the eagle doesn't arrive. What it means to stand on a mountain in the Caucasus with the chains broken and look at the sky and have it be just the sky, not the theater of your suffering, just sky. And then to take a step not toward the stake. I'll be here for that. One sentence before I go. One last thing in the specific dark this story built and is now beginning to vacate. The way water pulls back and leaves the sand wet and full of what passed over it. The Titans are still breathing. Good night.